You were sitting on a plastic stool in Hanoi. The steam from this just like phenomenal bowl of food is finally clearing up.
Oh, that sounds amazing right now.
Right. The broth is gone. The conversation is sort of winding down. And then, the vendor drops the bill on the table.
The dreaded moment.
Exactly. In literally any language, anywhere in the world, this is a moment of acute social anxiety.
Yeah.
It just is.
Yeah, absolutely.
But today, we are going to explore why the specific, highly idiomatic English words you choose in those next, 10 seconds can either completely preserve your dignity or make the entire table incredibly uncomfortable.
And it really is a crucible of cultural navigation, to be honest, because at that advanced level of fluency, vocabulary is, it's no longer about simple translation.
Right.
It's about power dynamics, social preservation, and, emotional intelligence.
Welcome to our deep dive. If you are joining us, you are a learner who has moved far past the basics. You already know how to ask for the check or calculate an exchange rate.
Yeah, we are well past that.
Today, our mission is to completely unpack the nuanced, emotional lexicon of money. We're leaving behind the dry, academic financial jargon of, amortized loans and macroeconomic theory.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, nobody wants to hear that right now. Yeah. We're plunging straight into the everyday phrases, the deeply ingrained idioms that native speakers use to navigate wealth, debt, and the heavy psychology of spending.
Which, requires an entirely different cognitive toolkit. Knowing the technical terms might help you pass an accounting exam, but mastering the idiomatic lexicon prevents you from becoming a social pariah.
Or worse, falling into ruinous psychological traps.
Exactly, because money is never just math, right? It is inextricably linked to our baseline survival instincts.
And to anchor this exploration, we are drawing from a really fascinating, highly sophisticated C2 level English language course. What makes this specific curriculum so compelling is its dedicated following in Vietnam.
Yes, an audience of advanced learners who, frankly, already comprehend the literal definitions of words like accumulate or deficit.
All right, they don't need a dictionary for that. And the hosts of this source material make a brilliant point. At the C2 level, you aren't just learning to speak. You are learning to encode generations of shared human trauma, scarcity, and ambition into your daily conversation.
You are inheriting a worldview. When a culture develops specific idioms for financial concepts, it reveals what that culture fundamentally fears and what it values. The language basically acts as a mirror, reflecting underlying behavioral economics.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start right at the foundational layer, how we talk about financial security.
The bedrock of it all.
Exactly. The source material highlights the strong cultural emphasis in Vietnam on saving for the future. But the way native English speakers express this concept idiomatically is it's deeply metaphoric.
Very much so.
You wouldn't normally sit at a cafe and announce, "I am collecting money."
No, you definitely wouldn't.
It sounds completely transactional, almost robotic. Instead, that native idioms are putting money aside for a rainy day or building a nest egg.
Well, let's pause right there, actually, because lumping those two phrases together is a super common mistake.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they actually represent two fundamentally opposing philosophies of financial defense. They are not interchangeable at all.
Wait, break that down for me. How are they opposing?
So a rainy day fund is an immediate, highly accessible financial safety net. It is explicitly designed for unexpected, acute emergencies. Think about the metaphor itself. Rain is a sudden external disruption, right? It forces you to alter your plans, seek shelter, and just, wait out a chaotic force of nature that you cannot control.
Oh, I see. So putting money aside for a rainy day is essentially an acknowledgement of our vulnerability. It's a reactive defense against chaos.
Exactly.
It's the fund you tap into when your motorbike engine seizes on the highway or you have an abrupt medical emergency, something you didn't see coming.
Precisely. But a nest egg operates on a completely different psychological wavelength. The source specifically contrasts the two. A nest egg is for long-term, highly intentional goals, most classically, retirement.
All right, the long game.
Yeah, and the imagery is vital here. A nest isn't built in a panic during a storm. It is painstakingly constructed, twig by twig, over an extended period of time. And the egg itself represents delicate biological potential.
I want to throw an analogy at this to see if it holds up. Let's say your personal finances are a house that you are building to protect yourself.
Okay, I like where this is going.
So the rainy day fund is the heavy-duty roof. It's the thing that takes the immediate beating from the sudden storms and keeps you dry today.
Right.
But the nest egg is the solid, concrete foundation you are slowly pouring into the ground for your future stability. Does that track?
Well, that analogy works perfectly for the roof, but I'd actually push back on the concrete foundation part.
Oh, really? Why?
Because if you pour concrete and walk away, it remains concrete. It's inert, doesn't do anything. The brilliance of the nest egg idiom is that it implies active incubation.
Ah, right, because it's an egg.
Exactly. An egg left alone in the cold will die. It requires constant warmth, protection, and vigilance to eventually hatch into something sustainable. If you ignore a financial nest egg, say, by leaving it in a savings account that doesn't outpace inflation, the potential basically dies.
Oh, wow. That is a fantastic distinction. The incubation is the compound interest. It requires active care.
What's fascinating here is how language inevitably evolves to make highly abstract mathematical concepts feel tangible and grounded in the natural world.
Yeah, because math is cold.
Right, and the human brain simply didn't evolve to intuitively process long-term actuarial math or, compound interest. But we instinctively understand the danger of a sudden storm, and we biologically understand the imperative to protect a nest. The idioms trick our primal brains into caring about modern financial planning.
It really is a survival mechanism encoded right into our vocabulary. It's amazing. Sure. But building that nest egg relies on a behavior the source identifies as living within your means.
Ah, yes. The golden rule.
Which, on paper, is the most boring, mathematically simple concept imaginable. Ensure your expenditures do not exceed your income. Make 100, spend 90.
Simple arithmetic.
Right. Yet, it is universally, notoriously difficult to execute. If the math is so simple, why is the execution so flawed?
Because we don't live in a spreadsheet. We live in a deeply hierarchical, competitive society. The math is simple, sure, but the sociology is just relentless.
Which acts as the perfect transition to our next conceptual layer. The shift from self-preservation to societal competition introduces us to the classic, perhaps the most infamous financial pitfall in the English lexicon.
Keeping up with the Joneses.
Keeping up with the Joneses. This is the exhausting compulsion to match the lifestyle and material possessions of your neighbors or your peers.
It is the ultimate disruption of logical financial planning. The Joneses represent a hypothetical, ubiquitous family that always seems to have slightly more status, slightly better clothes, and a slightly newer car than you do.
Always one step ahead.
Always. The phrase actually originated from a comic strip in the early 20th century, but the psychological trap it describes is profound.
The source material focuses heavily on how this phenomenon has mutated in the modern era, particularly pointing out the pressure of social media.
Oh, it's out of control now.
You open an app,
Yeah.
and you were immediately bombarded with friends taking lavish holidays in Europe or buying a new luxury vehicle. And suddenly, the perfectly functioning car in your driveway feels like a symbol of failure.
Right. The quiet weekend at home suddenly feels totally inadequate.
Exactly. This pressure, as the source notes, drives people to go in the red rather than staying in the black.
Those two color-coded idioms are foundational. In the black means you are solvent, you are profitable.
Meaning you have actual money.
Yes, and it originates from historical accounting ledgers where positive balances were physically recorded in black ink.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and in the red means you are overdrawn, operating at a deficit, or sinking into debt. Red is biologically and culturally the color of alarm, danger, and bleeding.
But let me challenge this framing of the Joneses for a second. Is this truly a modern crisis, supercharged by Instagram and TikTok, or is that just a convenient scapegoat?
That's a great question.
Think about a time you felt compelled to buy something incredibly impractical just to fit in at a new job or a new social circle. Was that the algorithm's fault, or is it just an ancient human flaw, like the deep-seated need to belong to the tribe?
It is absolutely an ancient evolutionary mechanism misfiring in a modern context. Anthropologically, displaying signs of resource abundance signaled your value to the tribe.
Meaning, you're a good hunter, you have food.
Right. If you appeared successful, you weren't ostracized, which literally meant you survived the winter. The flaw isn't the instinct itself. The flaw is the scale.
The scale of the tribe.
Yes. Historically, your tribe was the 50 people in your village. You only had to keep up with the actual Joneses next door.
Right.
What social media has done is infinitely expand the perimeter of your village. You are now competing with the highly curated, globally broadcast, heavily filtered highlight reels of millions of strangers, which completely shatters the logic of living within your means.
Completely. People willingly enter a state of perpetual debt, bleeding out in the red, simply to maintain a digital facade. They sacrifice their literal future security, their nest egg, for present-day social validation.
It is a terrifying trade-off when you realize the validation is a complete illusion anyway. You are financing a lifestyle you can't afford to impress strangers who are secretly drowning in debt trying to impress you.
It's a collective hallucination funded by high-interest credit.
That is so bleak.
It is. But this brings us to a stark divergence in the narrative. Because while one demographic is going into the red to buy designer bags, a massive portion of the population is facing a much more sobering reality.
Right, a totally different struggle.
They aren't trying to keep up with anyone, they're just trying not to drown.
This leads us directly into the language of acute financial hardship. If you strip away the social competition and look at bare survival, we hit the idiom, living paycheck to paycheck.
A very heavy phrase. Yeah, it describes a state where every single unit of currency you earn is allocated to basic survival, shelter, food, utilities before your next salary even arrives. The bank account functionally hits zero every single month.
The psychological toll of this state is absolutely devastating. When you live paycheck to paycheck, you inherently lack a rainy day fund.
There's zero buffer.
Exactly. And without that buffer, any minor friction in life, a flat tire, a sick child keeping you home from work for 2 days, it mutates from a minor inconvenience into an existential crisis. The entire operational structure of your life just teeters on the edge of collapse.
To capture that precariousness, the source provides the phrase, barely making ends meet.
Yes.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I want to focus on the physical visualization of these idioms. Think about making ends meet.
Okay.
It invokes the image of holding two ends of a frayed, snapping rope, pulling with all your physical might to stretch them across a gap to tie them together, and they're always just a millimeter short.
Oh, that's a vivid image.
Right. The physical tension of that act perfectly mirrors the cortisol spike of looking at your monthly bills versus your bank balance.
That physical mirroring is exactly what makes these C2 idioms so powerful. They map economic abstraction onto bodily sensation. Which brings us to the corresponding action required when you can't make ends meet. You are forced to tighten your belt.
Right. And as the source explicitly clarifies, tightening your belt doesn't mean you are trying to lose weight or your clothes don't fit.
No, not at all.
It means adopting a strictly frugal lifestyle to endure a period of scarcity. But why do we use a bodily metaphor for a budget cut? Like, why the belt?
Because scarcity is visceral. We use the physical sensation of bodily discomfort, specifically the constriction of the stomach associated with hunger, denial, and bracing for impact, to describe economic pain.
Wow.
It links financial lack directly to physiological deprivation. When you tighten your belt, you are literally bracing your core against the feeling of emptiness. It is a biological response to an economic threat.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. It's not just crossing out a line item on a spreadsheet. It's a literal feeling in your gut.
Exactly.
But this scarcity mindset leads directly into one of the most fascinating psychological traps we are going to cover today.
Oh, this part is wild.
When you are forced to tighten your belt, you naturally become obsessed with finding creative ways to save money. Every single penny counts. However, this desperation introduces a brilliant idiom that describes how trying to save money can actually trigger catastrophic losses.
Yes, we are entering the realm of complex behavioral economics, captured perfectly in the classic phrase, being penny wise and pound foolish.
Penny wise and pound foolish. Let's dissect the specific scenario provided in the source text, because it is a masterclass in flawed human logic.
It really is.
The source describes an individual who is incredibly meticulous about trivial sums of money. They will spend 3 hours driving their motorbike through chaotic traffic to different markets across Hanoi, burning fuel and exhausting their time, just to save 50,000 VND on a basket of vegetables.
Which is a microscopic financial victory. They are expending massive amounts of physical and logistical energy to secure a negligible discount.
Exactly. They stand at the vegetable stall feeling like a master negotiator. But then, this exact same person inexplicably turns around and finances a brand new vehicle at a predatory interest rate.
It makes no sense on the surface.
None. They lose massive amounts of wealth in long-term, compounding debt because they didn't bother to read the fine print on the loan agreement, all while feeling incredibly proud of saving a fraction of a dollar on tomatoes.
This perfectly illustrates a massive flaw in human risk assessment and cognitive bandwidth. We have a tendency to hyperfocus on microtransactions because they are tangible and easy to comprehend.
Right, you can see the tomatoes.
Yes, you can hold a tomato in your hand, you can argue over its immediate price, and you get an instant dopamine hit of control. But macrotransactions like compound interest, depreciation, or variable loan rates, they are invisible.
They're just numbers on a page.
Exactly. They are abstract concepts that require deep systemic thinking.
Let me push back on this, though. Isn't being penny-wise inherently a necessary trait if you are trying to build that nest egg?
Well, yes and no.
If you are living paycheck to paycheck, shouldn't you care about saving small amounts at the market? Why is being penny-wise inextricably linked to being pound-foolish in this idiom? Can't someone just be penny-wise and pound-wise?
Ideally, yes, you should be both. But the idiom doesn't condemn the act of saving pennies itself, it condemns the dangerous asymmetry of cognitive effort.
Meaning what?
The trap is decision fatigue. The human brain only has so much willpower and analytical bandwidth to spend each day. If you exhaust all your cognitive energy negotiating over vegetables and driving across town, your brain is fatigued when the big, complex choices arrive.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
You literally lack the mental energy to analyze the car loan, so you take the path of least resistance.
Wow. So you're burning your mental fuel on the completely wrong battles.
Exactly. Furthermore, this hyper-focus on immediate upfront cheapness leads directly to a concept economists call a false economy.
A false economy. The source gives a classic example of this. Buying a pair of remarkably cheap, low-quality shoes.
It's a very common trap.
Right, so they fall apart after a month of walking, forcing you to go out and buy another cheap pair, and then another.
The initial purchase masquerades as savings. You feel penny-wise at the cash register. But because the item lacks durability, the long-term replacement costs far exceed the price of simply buying one high-quality, expensive pair of shoes to begin with.
So you're actually losing money by being cheap.
Yes. The cheap shoes are a false economy. They are not a discount. They are a high-interest loan on your future spending.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the source introduces an academic term that acts as the ultimate antidote to the false economy and the penny-wise mindset. It is a critical concept for advanced English and advanced thinking: opportunity cost.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, opportunity cost really is the bedrock of rational decision-making.
It's a game changer.
It is the unseen phantom price of the alternative you didn't choose. Every time you make a choice, you aren't just spending money. You are spending the potential of what else that money or that time could have achieved.
The source uses time as the ultimate currency to explain this. If you spend your evening mindlessly scrolling on your phone, the opportunity cost isn't zero just because the app is free.
Right, time is never free.
The opportunity cost is the time you could have spent reading a book, learning a new language skill, or working on a side project to build your nest egg. You paid for that scrolling session with your own potential.
It completely reframes how you view resources. Apply it back to our penny-wise driver in Hanoi.
Good tomato negotiator.
Yeah. When they spent 3 hours driving across town to save a few thousand dong, they completely failed to calculate the opportunity cost of those 3 hours. Could they have worked an extra shift? Could they have rested so they'd be more productive at work the next day?
Right.
To avoid a false economy, you must calculate the true total cost of ownership, and that requires making the invisible opportunity costs visible.
It changes everything when you start viewing every decision through the lens of opportunity cost. But as we move into the next phase of our deep dive, we have to acknowledge that these internal cognitive calculations become exponentially more complicated and vastly more stressful when they collide with social etiquette.
Oh, without a doubt. Navigating personal finance in the privacy of your own mind is hard enough. Navigating it around a dinner table with your peers requires the diplomacy of a hostage negotiator.
Which brings us back to our opening scenario. The source material spends significant time exploring the precise linguistic tools needed to survive socially when money is involved.
Yes.
Let's return to that bowl of pho with friends. The meal is over, the bill arrives. This is the ultimate moment of social tension, and C2 English provides very specific idioms to diffuse it. The most common is the proposal of going Dutch.
Going Dutch is a fascinating phrase. When you suggest, let's go Dutch, you are proposing that everyone pays exactly for what they consumed, or that the bill is split evenly down the middle.
It's the great equalizer.
It really is. It immediately establishes a democratic fairness and removes the burden from any single individual.
Do we know where that phrase actually comes from? Like, why Dutch?
It actually stems from the 17th century Anglo-Dutch Wars.
Wait, really? The 17th century?
Yeah. The British created a lot of propaganda to paint the Dutch as stingy or ungenerous. So going Dutch originally had a slightly derogatory implication, meaning a lack of traditional hospitality where a host pays for everything.
Oh, wow. I had no idea it started as an insult.
Most people don't. But over the centuries, the negative connotation faded, and it has just become the standard, polite way to suggest equitable sharing.
It is certainly the most natural way to avoid one person footing the bill. Think about the physical imagery of that phrase, footing the bill.
It sounds heavy.
It implies bearing the heavyweight, standing as the solitary foundation for the entire group's expense. You don't want to force your friend to foot the bill, especially if everyone is trying to build their nest eggs.
Exactly. Similarly, the language shifts when you are organizing a collective purchase. The source uses the scenario of colleagues buying a birthday gift for a coworker.
Okay.
You wouldn't use formal, robotic language. You wouldn't say, I wish to participate in the finance of this item.
You'd sound like an alien.
Right. You say, can I chip in?
Let me chip in. It sounds so communal, so low pressure. A chip is a small fragment of a larger whole. You are simply adding your small piece to the collective pile.
Exactly.
But let's play out the difficult side of this scenario. Imagine you are the one who is genuinely struggling. You are living paycheck to paycheck, you are tightening your belt, and your friends invite you out for an expensive dinner or ask you to chip in a large amount for a lavish gift.
The worst feeling.
How do you gracefully decline without ruining the mood or sounding pathetic?
This is where language mastery transcends grammar and becomes social armor. It is entirely about preserving dignity. The source specifically contrasts the dramatic approach with the understated approach.
Right. If you stand up in the restaurant and declare, I cannot attend, for I am destitute, you instantly make your financial problem everyone else's emotional problem.
You kill the vibe.
You completely kill the vibe. It sounds like you are acting in a Charles Dickens novel.
And it forces your friends into a position of pity, which destroys the peer dynamic. Instead, a native speaker will employ softeners and calculated understatement.
That's a good example of that.
They will casually say, I'm a little short this month, or my personal favorite, I'm feeling the pinch right now.
Feeling the pinch. It's such a perfect linguistic tool. It connects right back to the physical metaphor of tightening the belt.
Yes, it does.
A pinch is a small, sharp, localized pain. It acknowledges the discomfort of the situation without declaring an absolute catastrophic failure.
And that nuance is the essence of advanced fluency. C2 mastery is understanding the emotional temperature of a phrase. Feeling the pinch signals to your peers that you need a pass on this specific expense, but it reassures them that you are fundamentally okay. It maintains social harmony and protects your personal dignity.
It is social armor. Now, for the final thematic phase of our deep dive, we are going to shift the scale entirely. We've talked about saving small change on groceries and the etiquette of splitting a restaurant bill.
The everyday stuff.
But what happens when these exact same psychological traps, the false economies, the sunk costs, the ego protection, what happens when they apply to massive, life-altering investments?
Well, the stakes become existential, and the language adapts to describe profound risk in catastrophic, cascading loss.
The source material pivots the discussion into high-level risk management, starting with a proverb that serves as the golden rule of investing. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
It is the universal layman's translation of portfolio diversification.
Which brings us back to the eggs.
Exactly. Let's trace the imagery back to our earlier discussion. If your nest eggs represent your future security, placing every single one of them into one speculative investment, one basket, is incredibly reckless.
Because if you drop it.
If that single investment fails, the basket drops and you lose everything simultaneously, your future is destroyed in one localized, avoidable event.
But what happens when an investment goes terribly, terribly wrong, despite your attempts to be careful? The source introduces us to the horrifying concept of the money pit.
Oh, the money pit. It is a brilliant descriptor because it is usually applied to a physical asset. The classic universal examples are an old, decaying heritage house or a heavily used, cheap luxury car.
Like buying an old European sports car.
Exactly. It is an asset that demands constant, relentless financial input for repairs, maintenance, and taxes, but yields absolutely zero return on investment and provides no joy.
It is a literal black hole that you are shoveling cash into.
Yeah.
But the true danger of the money pit isn't the faulty transmission or the leaking roof. It's what the asset does to your psychology.
Yes. This is the scary part.
The expert guide in the source dives deep into a very sophisticated idiom here, throwing good money after bad.
This is perhaps the most dangerous financial and psychological trap a human being can fall into. Throwing good money after bad perfectly encapsulates the behavioral economics concept known as the sunk cost fallacy.
Let's really break that down, because the sunk cost fallacy ruins lives.
It really does.
Yeah.
The sunk cost fallacy occurs when you have already lost money, the bad money, on a terrible investment.
Okay, let's use the used car example.
Sure. You buy the car, the transmission fails immediately. You've lost money. Logically, rationally, you should sell it for scrap and walk away.
Right, cut your losses.
But human beings are deeply averse to admitting defeat. The emotional pain of realizing you made a foolish choice is so intense that out of sheer stubbornness or irrational desperation, you keep pumping more money, the good money, into the broken asset.
Hoping for a miracle.
Hoping for a magical rescue that will validate your original decision.
So you replace the transmission. Then 2 weeks later, the engine block cracks. You replace the engine block and the electrical system fries.
Exactly. You are throwing good, newly earned money after bad, already lost money, simply to avoid looking in the mirror and admitting you bought a money pit.
So what does this all mean? Why are human beings so incredibly bad at knowing when to just cut their losses and walk away? Why do we fiercely protect our pride at the exact expense of our wallets?
This raises an important question about loss aversion. Psychologically, the pain of losing $100 is roughly twice as intense as the joy of gaining $100.
Wow, twice as intense.
Yeah. We desperately want to believe we are in control of our narrative. Admitting a total, unrecoverable loss feels like an existential failure. And this stubbornness, this lack of cold, calculating financial prudence, connects directly to the cynical but historically accurate proverb the source highlights. A fool and his money are soon parted.
Ouch. That is a brutal phrase. It offers zero sympathy.
It is brutal, but it serves as a stern, necessary warning. It observes that a lack of financial discipline or a susceptibility to ego and stubbornness makes people incredibly vulnerable in the open market.
It makes them targets.
It makes them targets for scams, it makes them prone to impulsive purchases to keep up with the Joneses, and it dooms them to throw good money after bad. The market is ruthless. If you cannot detach your emotions from your capital, society will easily, inevitably separate you from your wealth.
Which perfectly sets up the final lesson from our source material. It is the ultimate rule of financial pragmatism. Don't count your chickens before they hatch.
If the eggs in the basket represent your investments and potential, the hatching chickens represent realized liquid wealth.
Money you can actually spend.
Yes. In a financial context, this proverb is a strict warning against spending based on anticipated but unconfirmed income.
The source gives a highly relatable modern example. Don't go out and buy a brand new high-end laptop on a credit card in November just because you think you are getting a massive year-end bonus in December.
Because that bonus is a phantom. It isn't guaranteed.
Anything could happen.
The company could miss its quarterly targets, the broader economy could shift, or management could change. If you spend anticipated money and the event fails to materialize, you haven't just missed out on a laptop. You have instantly created a high-interest debt trap.
You have gone into the red.
You must wait until the cash is physically, indisputably cleared in your account until the chicken has actually hatched, before you alter your baseline of spending.
We have really traversed an incredible landscape today. Let's take a breath and review the journey we've just taken through the lexicon of money.
It's been quite the ride.
We started with the primal instinct of building a protective nest egg and recognizing the vulnerability that requires a rainy day fund. We analyzed the exhausting, ancient social illusion of keeping up with the Joneses and the visceral, physiological reality of tightening your belt when you are forced to live paycheck to paycheck.
We stripped down the cognitive traps of being penny-wise and pound-foolish, dissecting the danger of the false economy and the absolute necessity of calculating unseen opportunity costs.
And we learned how to navigate awkward social minefields by going Dutch, chipping in, and gracefully utilizing linguistic armor to admit when we were feeling the pinch, all while avoiding the catastrophic, ego-driven stubbornness of throwing good money after bad into a money pit.
What this exploration demonstrates so powerfully is that mastering these idioms is about far more than just passing a C2 language proficiency test.
It's not just a vocabulary quiz.
No, it is a deep exercise in sociology, history, and psychology. It is about recognizing the universal human behaviors, our irrational stubbornness, our susceptibility to social pressure, and our deeply rooted hopes for security that are baked right into the phrases we use every single day. When you use a phrase like penny-wise and pound-foolish, you aren't just demonstrating vocabulary, you are engaging with the human condition.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to mull over on your own. We've spent all this time today unpacking highly physical, tactile idioms.
Very hands-on phrases.
We talked about physically putting money aside, biologically incubating a nest egg, literally tightening a belt, chipping in fragments of cash, and the physical pain of parting with money. The language is rooted in things we can touch and feel.
Right.
But as we accelerate rapidly toward a completely cashless society, where spending is no longer handing over a coin, but just an invisible, frictionless digital tap of a phone, or a silent automatic subscription that we completely forget about, how will the language of money adapt?
It's a profound paradigm shift. The physical friction of spending is disappearing entirely.
Exactly. Will the visceral anxiety of living paycheck to paycheck still make the same kind of sense when there is no physical paper check to hold and no leather wallet to actually feel going empty in your pocket?
That's a great point.
When the pain of spending is completely removed by digital convenience, what new idioms will the next generation invent to describe the invisible, algorithmic traps of digital finance?
The language will have to evolve to describe the new invisible architecture, just as it adapted to describe ledgers in red and black ink.
And we will be here to dive into it when it does. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Keep examining the origins of your vocabulary, stay incredibly curious about the underlying psychology of the words you use, and as the original source material so warmly says to his dedicated listeners, come unkak ban. So if you look at a $100 bill, strictly through the lens of mathematics, it's honestly entirely uncomplicated.
Right. It's just a medium of exchange.
Exactly. It represents a fixed quantum of value. You know, you give someone the paper, they give you the groceries, the mass balances out, and the transaction is just over. It's sterile.
Completely sterile, until you start talking about it.
Yes. But the moment you introduce language into the equation, the moment you actually have to talk about that $100, all that precision just vanishes.
Oh, for sure. It gets incredibly messy.
Because the words we use to describe wealth and spending and financial ambition, they don't just represent numbers. They act like emotional Trojan horses.
That is a great way to put it, Trojan horses.
You carry all this hidden baggage, right? About our status, our deep-seated fears, survival instincts, and even how we perceive our own worth in society.
And that tension is exactly why financial language is so unbelievably difficult to master. I mean, you aren't just learning a vocabulary list here.
No, not at all.
You are trying to navigate a highly charged psychological landscape. If you're learning English for global business or, even just trying to level up your professional communication, memorizing the dictionary definition of profit or loss only gets you like maybe 10% of the way there.
Yeah, the literal meaning is just the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly, because the real currency of the modern business world is idiom. It is metaphor. It's the unspoken emotional subtext that actually dictates how a negotiation is going to play out.
Which is exactly our mission for this deep dive. Today, we are taking a massive stack of source material that unpacks the advanced, hidden language of wealth.
We're going deep today.
We really are. We are moving way beyond the spreadsheet to decode the psychology of spending, the invisible mechanics of business negotiation, and the whole mindset of modern money management.
Right, looking at phrases that describe the entire human financial experience.
From the really painful, restrictive anxiety of extreme frugality, all the way to the disorienting shock of a massive, life-changing windfall.
And this is intensely relevant to you, the listener, regardless of your current coordinates. I mean, you might be listening to this from a bustling tech hub in Hanoi or, navigating the incredibly dynamic entrepreneurial ecosystem of Saigon.
Which our source material specifically highlights, by the way.
Yeah, it points to those environments as absolute crucibles for modern global business. And in those hyper-competitive spaces, understanding the emotional weight of these English phrases isn't just some linguistic parlor trick.
It's survival.
It is the ultimate shortcut. It is how you signal to a partner or a client or an investor that you don't just understand the numbers on the page, but you understand the human beings who are moving those numbers around.
Okay, let's unpack this by starting at what might be the most uncomfortable end of the financial spectrum.
The extreme reluctance to spend.
Right. Now, logic would dictate that saving money is inherently good, right? We are all taught to be financially responsible. But the material highlights two very specific phrases that show how saving money can actually cross a psychological line and become, well, toxic. The phrases are tight-fisted and penny-pinching.
It's really vital to look at the physical imagery embedded in those two phrases, because they aren't compliments about someone's accounting skills.
Definitely not.
They are critiques of a person's emotional state. I mean, think about the word tight-fisted. It doesn't describe someone who thoughtfully evaluates a budget and, decides to defer a purchase.
No, it describes a posture of rigid, unyielding defense.
Exactly.
You literally picture someone grabbing a handful of cash, making a fist, and clenching their hand so hard that their knuckles turn white.
It's almost a panic response.
It really is. But wait, let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Sure.
If the goal in business is to retain capital, isn't a tight fist exactly what you want? I mean, if my hand is closed, nobody can take my money.
It's a compelling illusion of safety, but it's ultimately a paradox. Well, yes, a tightly closed fist ensures that the dollar you're holding won't slip through your fingers. You've successfully prevented loss. But look at the actual mechanics of a closed fist.
Okay.
If your hand is clenched shut in a defensive posture, it is physically impossible for you to reach out and grab anything new.
Oh, wow. That's true.
You cannot catch a passing opportunity. You cannot shake hands on a new partnership. The imagery of being tight-fisted perfectly encapsulates the paralysis of a scarcity mindset.
You're just frozen.
You are so consumed by the terror of losing what little you have that you freeze your resources, completely suffocating any chance for growth or expansion.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not about the money saved at all. It's about the opportunities destroyed by the fear.
Precisely.
And penny pinching seems to operate on a very similar frequency, but maybe with a slightly different flavor of dysfunction.
Yeah, it's a bit more active, isn't it?
Right, because a penny is an almost irrelevant amount of money. So if you are pinching it, you're exerting this immense amount of physical and emotional effort to control something that has virtually no real impact on your life.
The penny pincher is plagued by a catastrophic loss of perspective.
That's a great way to put it.
I mean, this is the person who will spend 3 hours of their Saturday driving to 3 different grocery stores across town.
Oh, we all know someone who does this.
Burning through gallons of expensive fuel just to save 45 cents on a carton of eggs.
It's irrational.
Totally. They feel a psychological victory because the math shows a 45-cent retention, but they have entirely ignored the macroeconomic reality of their own life. They just valued 3 hours of their finite human existence at 0.
Wow. That's bleak when you frame it like that.
It is a restrictive, miserable mindset that fundamentally misunderstands what value actually is.
Which brings us to a fascinating modern evolution. Because society still values resourcefulness.
Right.
We don't want to be tight-fisted, but we also don't want to be reckless.
Right. There has to be a middle ground.
And the material introduces this incredibly vibrant modern phrase that entirely flips the script on frugality. The phrase is ballin' on a budget.
This is such a brilliant linguistic pivot.
It really is.
Because ballin' is slang derived from the extravagant lifestyles of highly paid athletes, right?
Yeah.
Basketball players specifically.
Yeah, it has historically meant throwing money around with absolute abandon just to signal your high status to the world.
But when you append on a budget to it, you democratize that status. You completely change the rules of the game.
I love how active it is. It treats frugality not as a restriction, but as a challenge, like a game you can win.
Exactly.
The source material gives a couple of perfect examples of this. So imagine you walk into a room wearing a breathtaking, meticulously tailored vintage outfit.
Okay.
Everyone assumes you dropped $3,000 at a high-end designer boutique. But the reality is you spent an entire Sunday digging through racks at an obscure thrift store.
Relying entirely on your own superior eye for design.
Right. And you found a hidden gem for $20. You are experiencing the exact same social elevation and aesthetic pleasure as the person who actually spent the $3,000.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, ballin' on a budget represents a fundamental shift in how modern culture assigns prestige.
How do you mean?
Well, in the past, prestige was strictly tied to purchasing power. The mindset was, I can afford to waste this capital, therefore I am powerful.
Just brute forcing it with cash.
Right. But the modern hyper-connected consumer often finds that vulgar. Today, prestige is increasingly tied to system mastery.
System mastery, I like that term.
Yes, the ability to hack the mechanics of commerce. Let's look at the other example from the text, which is flying international business class.
Oh, this is the dream.
You're sitting in a lay-flat pod, sipping premium champagne at 30,000 feet. Now, the person in the pod next to you paid $12,000 in cash for their ticket. But you paid $92 in taxes because you strategically routed your everyday grocery and utility spending through a specific credit card for 2 years just to accumulate travel points.
Oh, the psychological victory there is immense. It feels so good.
It does, because you aren't just enjoying the luxury, you are enjoying the knowledge that you outsmarted the institution.
Yeah, you beat the system.
The tight-fisted person would refuse to take the trip at all out of fear.
Right.
The wealthy person simply throws money at the airline. But the person balling on a budget applies intellect and strategy and patience to bypass the financial barrier entirely.
So frugality becomes a badge of honor.
Exactly. It's a testament to your cleverness rather than a symptom of your poverty.
But let's look at the other side of that coin. Because if balling on a budget is the language we use when we are trying to outmaneuver our limited resources, what happens when the limitations vanish entirely?
A completely different scenario.
Right. What is the vocabulary of absolute limitless abundance?
The material highlights 3 specific phrases for this condition, and they each carry a very different emotional tone. The first is the phrase, money is no object.
You know, this one feels heavy to me. It doesn't sound playful like balling on a budget. It sounds cinematic, almost desperate.
That is a very astute reading of the phrase. While it technically means you have enough money to buy whatever you want, it is rarely used to describe a casual shopping spree.
No, nobody says that at the grocery store.
Right? As the material points out, money is no object is typically deployed in high-stakes, deeply emotional scenarios.
The example given is devastatingly clear. A family member falls gravely ill.
Yeah.
You're standing in the sterilized hallway of a hospital, confronting a specialist, and you look them in the eye and say, give them the absolute best treatment available in the world. Money is no object.
What's fascinating here is the psychological function of the phrase in that specific moment. By stating that money is no object, you are attempting to bend the reality of the physical world.
Bending reality. I like that.
In normal life, money is the ultimate object. It is the friction that slows everything down.
Always in the way.
But in a moment of existential crisis, you are linguistically stripping away the mathematical constraints of the universe. You are declaring to the doctor and to yourself that human life transcends commerce.
You are trying to buy a miracle by removing the concept of cost from the room entirely.
Precisely. It's a complete rejection of limits.
It's powerful. Now, the second phrase, having deep pockets, feels much less emotional and way more clinical.
Deep pockets is almost exclusively the domain of the corporate boardroom or the legal system.
Right.
It refers to extensive, seemingly endless financial reserves.
I always get a slightly cartoonish visual with this one.
Like what?
I imagine a venture capitalist wearing a custom-tailored suit, but the pockets on his trousers just extend endlessly down into the floor, like a bottomless well.
That's a great image.
He can just keep reaching down and pulling out stacks of cash long after everyone else's pockets have been turned inside out.
That visual perfectly captures the strategic advantage of deep pockets, because it's not just about being able to buy expensive things. It is about the capacity to endure.
Endure, like outlasting the competition.
Exactly.
Right.
In business, if a massive corporation with deep pockets wants to enter a new market, they can afford to operate at a massive loss for 5 years just to starve out the local competition.
Wow.
They can weather a recession. They can fund a decade of legal battles without flinching. Deep pockets is the language of financial stamina. It is the ability to outlast your opponent's bank account.
And then, pivoting wildly from the boardroom, we have the third phrase, which is rolling in it.
Oh, this is the most exuberant, physical, and frankly absurd phrase on the entire spectrum of wealth.
It really is. Rolling in it implies that you have generated so much liquid cash that you've just abandoned all normal protocols for storing it.
No banks, no portfolios.
Right. You aren't putting it in a diversified index fund. You are literally dumping it onto your living room rug and physically rolling your body around in the pile like a golden retriever in the grass.
Just pure, unadulterated financial joy.
Yes, it speaks to a level of wealth that has surpassed utility and entered the realm of the ridiculous.
It does. But this raises an important question for us to consider, looking at the source material. How relevant are these phrases to the average listener's daily reality?
Well, here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because the brutal, pragmatic truth is that they aren't relevant at all.
Not for most of us, no.
The vast majority of humanity is not standing in a hospital telling doctors that money doesn't matter. We do not have bottomless pockets to endure 5 years of corporate losses.
And we are certainly not rolling around on a pile of gold coins in our living rooms.
Definitely not. We are starting from scratch.
Yeah.
We are trying to build the pile. And that reality serves as the perfect transition to the next major concept in our material.
The defining economic movement of our generation.
The side hustle.
Yes, the side hustle.
Yeah, we have to be very precise here because the material draws a hard line on what this actually is. A side hustle is not just a second job.
Right, there's a big distinction.
If you work at a logistics company from 9 to 5, and then you take a night shift driving a forklift at a warehouse just to make sure your electricity doesn't get shut off, that is a second job. That is survival.
Exactly. The defining characteristic of the side hustle, linguistically and culturally, is intent.
Intent.
It is an endeavor driven by a specific passion, a creative impulse, or just a raw entrepreneurial spirit. It operates parallel to your primary source of income, but it serves a completely different psychological master.
The example in the text paints a great picture of this. You have a marketing executive, right?
Okay.
By day, they are drafting corporate press releases, navigating office politics, and collecting a steady, predictable salary.
It's a 9-to-5 grind.
But on Saturday morning, they transform. They fire up a laptop and run a boutique e-commerce store selling hand-poured candles. Or maybe they operate as a freelance copy editor for independent science fiction authors.
The side hustle is a laboratory for their own ambition. It's an identity entirely outside of their corporate badge.
But the material is very quick to point out that this laboratory is incredibly dangerous.
Oh, hugely dangerous.
Stepping into the entrepreneurial arena, even on a part-time basis, exposes you to a completely new set of financial risks.
And the phrase used to describe the most common failure state of the new side hustler is viscerally terrifying. It's bleeding money.
Bleeding money.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be a linguist to feel the panic in those two words. It likens a financial loss to a severe biological trauma.
What's fascinating here is the distinction between losing money and bleeding money.
Okay, unpack that.
If you misplace a $50 bill, you lost it. The event is over, you adjust your budget, and you move on.
Right, a one-time event.
But if you are bleeding money, you are experiencing a continuous, rapid, and seemingly uncontrollable hemorrhage of your resources.
That sounds incredibly stressful.
The timeline is critical here. It implies a crisis of outflow that will lead to catastrophic failure, death in the biological metaphor, or bankruptcy in the financial one if a tourniquet isn't applied immediately.
And the material outlines exactly how smart, capable professionals end up bleeding money when they start a side hustle.
It happens so often.
It's rarely because they're inherently bad at the work.
Yeah.
It's because they fundamentally misjudge the startup sequence.
Yes. They get intoxicated by the idea of being an entrepreneur.
Exactly. So before they have a single paying client, they rent a sleek co-working space, they buy a $3,000 laptop, they hire a branding agency to design a logo.
They open a massive gaping wound of overhead expenses.
But they haven't secured any revenue to act as a blood transfusion.
And if you ask them why they are doing this, why they are buying all this stuff, they will inevitably recite one of the most famous and potentially toxic idioms in the English language.
Which is?
You have to spend money to make money.
Okay, I have to stop right here and challenge this.
Please do.
You have to spend money to make money. People treat this phrase like it is an immutable law of physics. They say it with such absolute conviction.
They really do.
But looking at the context of bleeding money, isn't this phrase just a trap? Isn't it just a sophisticated lie we tell ourselves to justify buying shiny new toys?
It is the ultimate double-edged sword.
How so?
Well, on one edge of the blade, the phrase represents an undeniable fundamental truth of economics, which is the concept of return on investment, or ROI.
Right.
You cannot generate value from nothing. If you are starting a freelance photography side hustle, you cannot take professional wedding photos with a disposable camera.
Obviously not.
You must invest capital into a high-quality lens. You must invest money into a website to display your portfolio. You must spend a certain amount on targeted marketing to ensure couples actually know you exist.
So that expenditure is the fuel that runs the engine of revenue.
Right. If you refuse to spend anything at all, you are back to being tight-fisted, and your hand is too closed to catch any opportunity.
Makes sense.
But the other edge of the blade is where the carnage happens.
This is the trap part.
Because human beings are emotional creatures, we frequently use "you have to spend money to make money" as a psychological shield to deflect our own guilt over frivolous spending.
I see.
It becomes a permission structure for self-indulgence that's just disguised as business strategy.
Like, I absolutely need to finance this brand new $80,000 luxury SUV for my weekend gig delivering boutique cupcakes.
Yes.
The leather seats will impress the clients. You have to spend money to make money.
Exactly.
No, you don't. You just wanted a luxury car, and you're using the cupcakes as an alibi.
That's exactly it. The crucial skill, which the material emphasizes, is the ability to ruthlessly interrogate your own spending. You have to separate the biological need of the business from the emotional desire of the ego.
A calculated risk drives growth. Unexamined spending just makes you bleed.
Precisely.
So, let's imagine you survive this phase. You apply the tourniquet, you keep your overhead low, you buy only what you absolutely need, and you don't bleed out.
Okay, you're stable.
Now, you face an entirely different kind of terror. You actually have to sit across a table or a Zoom screen from another human being and ask them to hand over their money in exchange for your services.
The negotiation phase.
Right. We are moving from the psychology of spending to the psychology of pricing and negotiation.
And for anyone stepping into the freelance or side hustle market, the immediate psychological hurdle is establishing your own value.
That's always tough.
The material introduces a phrase that perfectly captures the failure to clear this hurdle, and it's selling yourself short.
To sell yourself short. That means to deliberately underestimate your true value, or to willingly accept less compensation than your expertise actually warrants.
It's an act of self-sabotage, really.
And this is where the material gets incredibly specific regarding the global landscape. It highlights that selling yourself short is a massive systemic pitfall for non-native English speakers attempting to integrate into the global freelance economy.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that.
Please do.
Obviously, there is the baseline intimidation of negotiating in a second or third language. You might worry that you'll use the wrong preposition and look unprofessional.
Sure, that's a natural fear.
But the material implies the issue goes much deeper than just grammar anxiety. It is deeply tied to geographic and economic anchoring.
What does that mean in practice?
Imagine a highly skilled software developer based in a developing economy. They possess the exact same technical proficiency as a developer living in Silicon Valley.
Okay, equal skills.
But when the developer in the emerging market logs onto a global platform and sees the standard international rate for their work, a profound cognitive dissonance occurs.
Because the global rate might be 10 times higher than the local rate in their home city.
Exactly. They experience a virulent strain of imposter syndrome. They look at that global number and their brain says, that is an absurd amount of money. I can't possibly demand that. Who do I think I am?
Oh, so they panic.
So preemptively, without the client even pushing back or negotiating, they slash their own rate by 40% just to feel psychologically safe.
Wow. They're negotiating against themselves.
They believe they're being competitive, but in reality, they are communicating to the client that their work is of lower quality. They are selling their expertise short because they let their local geography dictate their global value.
That is a tragedy.
Oh.
They're essentially acting like a penny pincher with their own self-worth.
It's a very hard trap to escape.
So how does a freelancer anywhere in the world navigate that terrifying moment when a potential client looks at them and says, so how much is this going to cost?
Right, the million-dollar question.
You don't want to sell yourself short by naming a tiny number out of fear, but you also don't want to terrify the client by demanding an exorbitant fee before you even understand the project.
It's a delicate balance.
But the material offers a brilliant linguistic tool to navigate this trap, and it's the ballpark figure.
Ah, the ballpark figure. It is a masterclass in the art of non-committal negotiation.
The imagery is rooted in American baseball, right?
Yes, exactly.
If someone hits a ball entirely out of the stadium, you might not know exactly which car in the parking lot it hit, but you know it is no longer in the ballpark.
Right.
It's an idiom about establishing a perimeter of expectation. You aren't pinpointing the exact blade of grass. You're just confirming we are standing in the right stadium.
And the tactical application of this in business is profound. Let's say a corporate client approaches you for a consulting contract. They ask for your price in the very first email.
Which happens all the time.
All the time. At this stage, you suffer from a massive lack of information. You don't know the scope of their problem, the timeline, or the resources required. If you give them a fixed hard number right then, you are setting a trap for yourself.
Right. If you confidently say, my fee is $5,000, and then 2 weeks later you discover the project requires 80 hours of work a week and 3 international flights.
You're in trouble.
You are locked into a financial nightmare. You have guaranteed that you will bleed money.
Conversely, if you say, I need $20,000, and the project only required 2 hours of your time, you've alienated the client and lost the job entirely.
So what's the alternative?
This is why you deploy the phrase. You say, I need to review the full scope of the project before providing a formal quote. But as a ballpark figure, we are looking at somewhere between $8,000 and $10,000.
So what does this actually accomplish in the negotiation dynamic?
It accomplishes 2 critical things simultaneously. First, it drops a psychological anchor.
Okay.
It immediately tests the client's budget without making a formal commitment. If the client's budget was $500, they will recoil, and you can politely walk away without having wasted days writing a formal proposal.
That saves so much time.
But secondly, it maintains absolute fluidity. It gives you the structural permission to adjust the final price up or down once you actually understand the work involved. It protects your boundaries while keeping the conversation alive.
It's a beautifully elegant piece of communication. You establish your worth without painting yourself into a corner.
Exactly.
But this leads us to a very dark pivot in our deep dive.
Yeah.
We have spent all this time analyzing how to protect yourself when you are the one selling the service. But what happens when you step out of the side hustle, you log off the computer, and you re-enter the world as a consumer?
The tables turn.
What happens when, and the material uses the modern airline industry as the ultimate case study for this, which is almost too painful to talk about because we have literally all lived it.
It is the perfect laboratory for this phenomenon. The trap relies on manipulating your initial emotional state.
Oh.
You go online searching for a flight for a weekend getaway. The algorithm presents you with a massive, bold font advertising a one-way ticket for $39.
$39. Your brain just floods with dopamine. You look at that screen and you think, I am getting this for a steal.
Right.
Now, a steal in this context doesn't mean you are committing a crime. It means the value disparity is so heavily weighted in your favor that it feels like you are getting away with something illicit.
You feel brilliant.
You feel like the ultimate budget baller.
But that feeling of triumph is entirely engineered. It is the bait. Because the moment you click purchase, the structural integrity of that $39 price tag completely collapses.
It vanishes.
You are thrust into a gauntlet of microtransactions.
The nickel and diming begins. The website politely asks, would you actually like to select a seat, or would you prefer we randomly assign you a middle seat next to the bathroom? Selecting a seat is a $25 fee.
You grit your teeth and pay it.
Then it asks, do you intend to bring clothing on this journey? A carry-on bag is $40. You pay it.
It keeps going.
Then the most insulting hurdle of all. Would you like to print your boarding pass at the airport so you can legally board the aircraft? That is a $15 convenience fee.
By the time you finally navigate the checkout labyrinth, your $39 steal has ballooned into a $119 reality.
What's fascinating here is the sheer velocity of the emotional whiplash.
Yeah.
You don't just feel disappointed, you feel actively violated.
What's fascinating here is that you transition from the high of the steal directly into the fury of the ripoff.
A ripoff.
Yes.
Yeah.
A ripoff is the linguistic realization that you are the victim of a systemic overcharge. But the anger doesn't stem from the final mathematical number.
It doesn't.
No. Think about it. If the airline had simply advertised the flight at $119 from the very beginning, you likely would have evaluated it, decided it was a fair market price, and purchased it without a second thought.
That's totally true.
The rage comes from the feeling of deception. The nickel and diming is a breach of the social contract. It's the extraction of capital through 1,000 tiny hidden cuts.
Which is why our language escalates so dramatically to describe it. We don't just call it unfair. We use terms usually reserved for violent crime.
Like what?
The material highlights 2 phrases: highway robbery and daylight robbery.
These are profound accusations. Let's examine the implications of daylight robbery.
Historically, robbery is a crime of the shadows, right?
Yeah.
A thief breaks into your house at 3 a.m. or mugs you in a dark alley because they require the cover of darkness.
They don't want to be seen.
Right. They are afraid of being identified, and they are afraid of the consequences. But if a corporation's pricing model is described as daylight robbery, the implication shifts entirely.
If someone robs you in broad daylight, standing in the middle of a crowded town square at noon, it means they are completely unafraid of you.
They don't care who sees.
They don't need to hide their actions because they know you are utterly powerless to stop them. When we accuse an airline or a telecom company of daylight robbery, we are acknowledging a massive asymmetry in power.
They have all the leverage.
They are openly extracting our wealth right to our faces because they possess a monopoly on the service and they know we have no alternative but to comply.
It is deeply cynical and honestly a little exhausting.
It is.
I mean, you spend your day trying not to bleed money in your side hustle, making sure you don't sell yourself short, only to get nickel and dime the moment you try to buy a plane ticket.
It feels like you can't win.
It makes you wonder, how do we build lasting wealth in an environment that is constantly trying to extract it from us?
That is the ultimate question.
The material suggests that the ultimate defense mechanism doesn't come from a modern business textbook. It comes from the past. We have to look at the generational wisdom passed down through families.
This is perhaps the most crucial part of the deep dive. The material pivots to the foundational idioms, the proverbs repeated by parents and grandparents, which actually serve as the operating system for a resilient financial mindset.
The first one is a phrase I guarantee every single person listening has heard at least once in their childhood.
I can probably guess it.
Money doesn't grow on trees.
Ah, yes. It is the universal anthem of exasperated parents worldwide.
It really is. The scenario in the material is classic. A young child, completely ignorant of macroeconomic reality, points to an outrageously expensive toy in the store window and demands it.
And the parent, exhausted from a long work week, sighs and delivers the proverb, "Money doesn't grow on trees."
I love dissecting the surreal imagery of this. As a kid, you literally imagine an oak tree in the backyard just blooming with crisp $100 bills.
Right, like picking apples.
But the lesson the parent is attempting to impart is about the fundamental nature of resources. Think about a leaf on a tree. It is the definition of passive abundance. Nature generates the leaf effortlessly.
And if a leaf falls off, the tree simply grows another one.
Exactly. It requires zero conscious exertion from the human being.
But capital is the exact opposite of a leaf. Money is the physical manifestation of human exhaustion.
That's a heavy way to look at it, but it's true.
In order to acquire that money, the parent had to trade irreplaceable hours of their limited lifespan, applying physical or intellectual labor. Therefore, money is finite. It does not regenerate naturally.
The proverb is a gentle, albeit frustrating, introduction to the concept of scarcity and the necessity of respecting the labor required to survive.
And that deep respect for the resource bridges perfectly into the second foundational proverb highlighted in the text, waste not, want not.
Waste not, want not. It operates less like an observation and more like an equation. It guarantees a specific outcome.
Yes, exactly.
If you are meticulous in how you utilize your current resources, if you do not squander what you have, you will insulate yourself from the desperation of wanting or needing things in the future.
And this is where the material makes a really beautiful cultural connection. It links this philosophy explicitly to Vietnamese culture, noting how resourcefulness and a deep respect for utility are woven into the societal fabric.
It's a really important distinction to make. In many highly consumer-driven Western economies, discarding a broken item and immediately buying a new one is seen as a sign of prosperity.
Like a flex.
Right. But the cultural resonance highlighted here suggests a different metric of value. It isn't merely about being frugal, it is an ethic of maximization.
Maximization.
If a piece of clothing tears, you repair it. If an appliance breaks, you fix the motor. You extract every possible ounce of utility from an object before discarding it.
It is a cultural manifestation of the waste not, want not principle. It is an organized resistance against bleeding money on an everyday basis.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this isn't just about saving a few dollars by fixing a toaster.
No, it's much bigger than that.
This generational mindset of radical resourcefulness is the psychological foundation required to execute the most powerful wealth-building mechanism ever discovered.
We are talking about compounding interest.
We are. The material drops a massive historical reference here. It notes that the physicist Albert Einstein allegedly referred to compounding interest as the eighth wonder of the world.
Whether Einstein actually said it or if it's apocryphal, almost doesn't matter because the math justifies the hyperbole.
It really does.
To place a financial equation alongside the Great Pyramid of Giza or the Hanging Gardens of Babylon tells you everything you need to know about its power.
The text uses the classic snowball effect to explain the mechanics, and it is the perfect metaphor.
Let's walk through it.
Imagine you were standing at the top of a very long, snow-covered mountain. You pack together a tiny handful of snow. That tiny handful is your initial modest investment money you saved because you embraced the waste not, want not philosophy. You place that small snowball on the ground and roll it forward.
And as it completes one revolution, it picks up a thin layer of new snow.
That is the initial interest you earn on your principal.
But here is where the wonder of the world physics take over. As the snowball gains that new layer, its overall circumference expands. The surface area increases.
So it covers more ground.
So on the second revolution, it is physically capable of picking up more snow than it did on the first. On the third revolution, it picks up even more. You are no longer just earning interest on your original handful of snow, you are earning interest on the interest.
And the most critical variable in this equation is the length of the hill.
Because the hill represents time.
Right. If you leave that snowball rolling for 30 or 40 years, the exponential growth becomes staggering. By the time it reaches the bottom of the valley, that tiny handful of snow you packed together in your 20s has transformed into a massive, unstoppable boulder.
It requires almost no daily effort from you other than the discipline not to interrupt the rolling.
Compounding interest is the ultimate reward for patience. It is the mathematical triumph of the slow, steady accumulation of value.
But the material introduces a stark contrast to conclude its analysis.
A completely different scenario.
It asks us to consider what happens when the element of time is entirely removed. What happens when wealth does not roll down a hill over 40 years, but simply falls out of the sky in an instant?
That phenomenon is captured in a single, evocative word: a windfall.
Even the etymology of the word is instructive. It originally referred to fruit or timber that was blown down by the wind.
Right. The farmer didn't have to chop down the tree or climb up to pick the apples. A sudden gust of wind simply deposited the valuable resources onto the ground, free for the taking.
In modern financial language, a windfall is a sudden, massive, and entirely unexpected gain of wealth.
The material provides the specific phrasal verb to come into money.
Like an inheritance.
Exactly. Discovering you've gained a massive inheritance from a distant relative who passed away, or selling a startup company overnight, or even winning the lottery. You didn't build the snowball. You just walked through a door and came into a room where the giant boulder of wealth already existed.
And a windfall represents the ultimate, terrifying stress test of everything we have discussed in this deep dive.
How so?
Because sudden wealth acts like a magnifying glass on your existing financial psychology.
Oh, that makes sense. It amplifies whatever is already there.
If you possess the mindset of someone who is ballin' on a budget, who understands value, who respects the waste not, want not philosophy, a windfall gives you the capital to generate generational security.
But on the flip side,
if you secretly harbor the mindset of someone who bleeds money, if you believe that you must constantly spend money to prove your worth, a windfall will destroy you.
You'll just bleed faster.
You will view the inheritance not as a tool for compounding, but as an endless supply of fuel for consumption. And as countless lottery winners have demonstrated, even a massive windfall can be bled dry if there is no psychological tourniquet.
So, what does this all mean? We have traversed a massive psychological landscape today.
We covered a lot of ground.
We started by looking at the white-knuckled fear of the tight-fisted penny pincher. We examined the clever, gamified status of ballin' on a budget.
We stood in the hospital and declared money is no object.
We walked through the treacherous minefield of the side hustle, trying desperately not to bleed money or sell ourselves short.
We raged against the daylight robbery of being nickel and dimed.
And finally, we looked at the slow, majestic snowball of compounding interest versus the sudden shock of a windfall.
What it means is that the language of wealth is never just a vocabulary list. It is a mirror.
A mirror.
The idioms and phrases you instinctively reach for when discussing money reveal your deepest assumptions about risk, about your own self-worth, and about your relationship to power and survival. True fluency in the global business environment requires mastering both the mathematics on the spreadsheet and the complex emotional currents running just beneath the words.
But consuming this deep dive is only half the battle. Knowledge that isn't activated is just trivia.
Right, you have to apply it.
The material leaves us with a provocative challenge, a way to test this new psychological fluency. And I am putting this challenge directly to you, the listener. I want you to genuinely mull this over today.
It's a great question to ask yourself.
If you were going to launch a side hustle tomorrow morning, if you were going to step into the arena and risk your own capital and time, what exactly would that business be? And more importantly, having decoded the traps we discussed today, what specific, ruthless steps would you take to ensure you don't start bleeding money on day one?
This raises an important question for your own self-reflection. When faced with that initial startup cost, how will you know if you are making a necessary investment to generate ROI, or if you are just using "you have to spend money to make money" to justify lack of discipline?
Exactly. The line between strategy and self-delusion is razor thin. When we began, we talked about how financial language is murky and emotional, like navigating through thick fog.
But hopefully, by unpacking the psychology behind these phrases, we've burned off some of that fog.
You can now see the consumer traps, the negotiation anchors, and the true mechanisms of wealth for what they really are. Use this vocabulary to your advantage. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Go figure out that side hustle, protect your capital, and we will catch you next time.